Savvy Central Radio, drawing out the best from our guest, with your host, Christina Nitchman.
If you are an American and concerned about your family's health and safety, you'll not want to miss Savvy Central Radio's live interview and film screening with Dr. Gregory A. Smith, MD, producer of American Addict 2, taking place this November 6th and 7th. American Addict 2 digs deeper into the world of corruption, politics, and pharmaceutical greed. Tickets are limited for this private viewing, live interview, and Q&A, so get your tickets today while they last at bit.ly/AmericanAddict2. This is your host, Christina Nitchman. Each week, Savvy runs weekly broadcasts providing entrepreneurs and successful individuals a platform to express their dreams, hopes, lessons learned, expertise, and wisdom with the world. Our guest today is Diane Darling. Diane knows the value of relationships and how to build them. She's the author of McGraw-Hill's definitive book on networking, The Networking Survival Guide. Diane speaks and trains thousands of people each year on ways to build relationships leading to opportunities and growth. She believes that anyone can leapfrog their way to successful relationships once they master the art of networking. Find out more about Diane at Diane Darling, DARLING.com. Hi, Diane. Welcome to Savvy Central Radio. How are you today?
I'm well, Christina. So nice to be with you today.
Well, I'm very happy that you're with us as well. And you're going to talk about a very important topic that I've heard business owners talk about and often get misconstrued about, and that is the topic of networking and connecting with businesses. So, and a very important thing if you want to build your business and get sales. So explain for our audience a little bit about how you came into this niche and working to build your company, Darling Institute.
Well, I came into this kind of by accident. I had a business that I was getting started called Lost and Found. I was going to help airlines and hotels manage their lost and found inventory because I used to be in the travel business and was chasing down lost things, and the hotels and airlines don't want them. It's a liability, and the individual wants it back. And in many cases, it's a jacket or something, and even if it's something of value, it's still the people want to get it back. And so what I discovered was there really wasn't an easy way to do this. So fast forward, I was working on it. My most likely investor was going to be my former boss. We had been talking about meeting together. Anyhow, that was kind of not happening. And then I kept thinking it was going to happen. And then the incredibly awful thing was that he was killed on September 11th.
Wow.
And so all of a sudden, I had put my savings into this. I had put everything into this, not having a plan B, which is something I tell business people. You need to have a plan B. No one expects a September 11th, and nor should you. But a plan B doesn't mean you're expecting anything bad. It just means that if anything bad happens, you can recover. Yeah. But I didn't. And so I was kind of limping along, and someone said to me, Diane, you did such an amazing job trying to get that off the ground. As a first-time business owner, I was impressed that you got the most amazing meetings with executives at hotels and airlines and senior folks, even though you had never been in business before. Can you talk about could you ever do a workshop on how you network to get those meetings? And I scratched my head thinking, I don't know what I did, and I said, tell me more what you want. And she said, well, what if you call Christina and she doesn't return your phone call? And what if, her brother or neighbor says, oh, Christina will help you out, and how many times do you bug her? Then let's say she does help you out. Do you write a handwritten note? Do you call her? Do you send her chocolates? And then they said, what if you forget her name when you see her on the street because you see her often with her dog and you remember the dog's name but not hers? And so
I can relate to that one.
Absolutely. And so everybody can relate to that one. And so part of what it was that people were looking for guidance, frankly, just how to feel good about themselves, how to make other people feel good about it, which is really what networking is. Mm-hmm. And so I did a workshop. And I didn't have any title for it. And it was kind of, I said, just Just email me questions and I'll answer them one night. And it became kind of a Letterman top 10. And I shared my kind of top 10 from those questions. And then somebody in that audience said, can I bring you into my company and have you do that for the art department? It was an advertising agency. And she goes, the salespeople get all the credit for the networking, but the art department and the client services department are really the ones that keep the business, get referrals, and grow our business. Could I have you come in and talk to them? What's your fee? And I thought, let me get back to you.
I've had that happen too.
And that's literally how it started. And I share with people that I said this to somebody who I bumped into on Sunday. I said, if you think you don't have skills, find somebody else and ask them what you're good at, because they may see things in you that you don't even know you have. Great. Go to SurveyMonkey, send it out to about 20 or 30, ideally is a big crowd, because you're going to get about a 10, 15% response, and say, what are 5, 10 words that describe me? What are 3 or 4 jobs I should think about? Particularly people who are mid-career and trying to figure out what to do. And that's how it got started. Mm-hmm. And then the quirky thing was, within a year, I was in the Wall Street Journal, had a book contract with McGraw-Hill, and had been on NBC Nightly News. And I did not have a book agent, a PR agent, or anything, but other people made those introductions to me because they liked what I did for them.
Wow. I really like that last piece there. They liked what you did for them. Right. Meaning, I think there's nothing better than what, as far as word of mouth and doing expert work for someone, really making a customer happy and just having them spread the word for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you were mentioning back, forgetting someone's name, or if someone doesn't call you, how do you keep tabs on them? These are some really good questions I know our audience is really going to want to have more feedback on. But really, before we go there, what exactly is the meaning of network? What does that mean when you say networking?
So for me, it means I've got 2 definitions. One is it's building relationships before you need them. Now, that doesn't mean that the person who's going to help you is somebody who you already know, but somebody who you already know may make that introduction, but they already know you. Mm-hmm. The goofy example I use is AAA. Whenever my car breaks down, I call them and say my membership number is. I don't say I want to join. Now, if I want to join, they'll help me out. But it's usually I live in Boston, and when you're in the cold that we had this winter, you don't want to be spending more time pulling out your credit card. You just want someone to come and help you. Mm-hmm. So in many cases, it may not actually be the people you know, but you can tap into their network if they know and like you. 2, networking is the transference of trust. So people will give out, their contact information, or they will say, gee, let me see what I can do to help you, and tap into that if they trust you. Mm-hmm. And so they'll transfer their trust to somebody else. And so I think that's very important for someone to think about the level of trust. I think the point of trust, though, is very important. Part of what it is that there are, and particularly now that social media is so accessible, we can go on to Yelp and, get a review of a restaurant. And those things are very helpful for things that are more transactional. Mm-hmm. But when we're talking about a dentist, or we're talking about financial services, or we're talking about, cat food, it is things like that people have a little bit closer to their heart. That is often where you're going to go to more of a trusted network. Now, one of the things I think that is so important to do is to let people know what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And this is something a lot of people assume, I know people are building their business, but are they top of mind? Sometimes not, frankly. Mm-hmm. So it's really important for us to remind people and be in touch with people and let them know what we're doing and how they can help us and who would be a good introduction. It's really unfair for us to think everybody can read our mind, know what we're doing. My business has transitioned in the last few years. I used to be exclusively on networking. I'm now doing some facilitation. On occasions, I'll do a little bit of presentation in the bucket of really, when you're at a networking event, how do you present yourself? More than, how do you do a keynote sort of a thing. Mm. So it's transitioned a bit. I'm also doing some more online work. And frankly, when I started it 15 years ago, there were 3 of us in the United States who taught networking. It was pre-LinkedIn, pre-Facebook. And now everybody who's got a LinkedIn page thinks that they're an expert on networking. So all of a sudden, my competition has gone from 2 to 300 million who are all on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and I don't know if all of them are super experts, as it were. I often hear that word kind of interchangeably and used excessively. And sometimes I wonder if all the people mentioning themselves as experts in a certain field really are.
No,
yeah.
but they call themselves that, and they convince others to part with money. And what happens is all of a sudden, you're in a cluttered situation. And so you have to declutter, bring yourself to the forefront to let people know that you are different. I have a different level of expertise. Mm-hmm. Am I the only person people should hire? Of course not. But, put my name into the hat for specific reasons that make sense for other people.
Yeah. And there's always what works for one person, or the way someone does something may not work for another person. Like even being a talk show host, I'm one of many, and I'm sure there's many of other good ones out there that will meet and feel good for one person, maybe not so much for another person. So
absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one thing I find is, I'm originally from the Midwest. Well, I'm originally from all over. My father was a professor of political science. And so I grew up traveling extensely. And we lived in the Philippines as a kid. I was a racial minority in my first class. I was the only white girl. And then I was in high school for Thailand. In the interim, I was in Colorado. But a good chunk of my life was in central Indiana. And one thing that you find when you're from the Midwest is you're very friendly. You say hi to everybody. And so most people consider me an extrovert. I actually test as an introvert, but I say I'm a friendly introvert. But I'm very passionate about helping people who are introverts understand they can be really good at this, because in many cases we're good listeners. We connect. We think before we talk. And in many cases, that can really help us find what's the right match and drill down to the relationship and move that forward. We don't need a million friends to make us feel good about ourselves.
I like that, because I was going to ask, in regards to networking, is there a difference for introverts versus extroverts, and does one have a advantage over the other, or is it just differences?
It's different, and I think you need to be functional at both. So I think, when it's time for you to go into an event, represent your organization, go say hi to people, you don't want to be perceived as being aloof or unfriendly. I had a woman who saw me at an event, probably 4 or 5 years ago, and she pulled me aside. She goes, I've always wanted to give you this feedback, which is always like a great, what's happening next. And she said she had met me at an event a couple of years before, and I had kind of brushed her aside. Well, I felt awful, that was her perception. And she says, I assumed I wasn't worth your time. And I said, I felt horrible, but because that was her perception of me. The reality was I was probably at the end of my capacity of small talk and people. And if I had done 2 events that day, or if I'd given a couple speeches that day, or had gone to something, I've been out of words. I just would have been spent. But her perception was that I was really rude and aloof. And extroverts don't have that. They can keep going. They're the Energizer Bunny. Bill Clinton is the ultimate example. He just keeps going and going and going. When he's by himself, he gets in trouble, as we all now know.
Yeah. And interestingly, for me, I've always been told I'm an extrovert, but I do get very tired being in social functions, and I can totally relate to what you're saying, because after a couple hours of being with people, especially new people, my brain goes on like it's blank, and I'm like looking at people like I can't talk to you because my brain just doesn't come up with any more words.
Yeah. And I don't think we should be hard on ourselves about that. I think that's just the reality of the situation. So I think extroverts need to at times be quiet. I had a date the other night, and he said he was an extrovert, and I know so much about him. At the end, I got a very nice email saying, there was no sparkle. I'm like, there was no sparkle, sweetheart, because you did all the talking. It's gone, but it cracked me up, because I was like, of course there's no sparkle. You know nothing about me.
Yeah, exactly.
You know nothing. I mean, he knows some, but not a lot. And compared to all the I even know what he paid for his house. It just was ridiculous that I would know all of this within, a half an hour, 45 minutes of meeting for all practical purposes, a stranger. So but they love to share. They love to effuse. That attention is important to them. Whereas I think for introverts, it's just how we process. It's not, are we likable or not likable? I like people, and for the most part, they like me. But I think it's important for us to kind of know when we go, how we can best function. Whenever I go to a conference, I take a big pashmina shawl with me, and on occasions I'll go find a chair completely as far away from the convention as I possibly can, and I'll put that shawl over my head and I'll put on the timer for 20 minutes, and then I'm like new.
That's a really good tip.
Oh,
and
my
when
gosh.
it gets burned out.
You just, there's a article recently I saw about napping rooms in a lot of technology companies now. And they have these pods where you can kind of just crawl in and, put the hood over your head. We need quiet time. And especially given there's so much shared space these days in businesses. There's a company I talked to the other day that they're going to be going from offices to shared space. And it's not even going to be assigned shared space. Every day you come in, it's going to be a different place. I think that's going to be very disruptive.
Yeah.
And that's a company that does a lot of accounting, so you're going to have by default more introverts than not.
Wow, yeah, that sounds like a recipe for disaster, actually.
I'll be curious.
Wow. Well, what have you seen amongst businesses yourself as some of the biggest faux pas when it comes to networking, and what would be some of your suggestions to people with these faux pas if they tend to notice that they're doing some of the things?
I think a faux pas is that people don't really understand what networking is. I think that's a big one. 2, it's kind of like good manners. You just go expect people to know it. I was at an event the other day, and we were listening to application for events, and they had hosted a lunch for a bunch of us to find out about the app. And I was startled at the table manners at my table. And they weren't horrible. But it was not what I would do at a business lunch. And, reaching in front of people to get the salt and pepper instead of saying, pass it, would you please pass it? Just, clunk, clunk, clunk with their food. There was just, to me, this was a business setting that I might hire one of these people, refer some of these people, and there was, to me, a disconnect. And so I think in some cases, because we have so many different places we're coming from, be it education, family units, culture, I would want to know what's going to be the appropriate thing for me to do if I'm ever going to have a meal in a different country. So part of it would be, in some cases, I think we have this assumption that, because you're X age or you're from X area, you know what to do. You know how to conduct yourself. When I sat down at the table, it was a half moon shape, and for 5 people at the seat, and I sat, one woman was on one side, then 2 on the other side. So I just kind of sat down in the middle, and I reached out my hand to both sides, and then the people on opposite sides introduced themselves. They've been sitting at the same table and not said hello.
Well, that's bizarre. But I'm sure there's a lot of people, including myself sometimes, where if I had been to a number of events where I gonna be like, okay, I'm not going to say hello to anyone else for right now. But that's why it was a good idea, like you mentioned, to take a break away from the group, to resettle yourself, rebalance yourself, and then come back so that you're not ignoring people by accident or something like that. Absolutely.
But if you're going to go to a lunch, go.
Yeah.
If you to sit down at a table and not say hello to the people at the table was just, to me, like, are you kidding me? It was just really surprising.
Yeah, totally. And I like that you mentioned that, to realize, depending on where you're going to be networking, there'll be different customs, and not to assume that you know everything there is to know wherever you're going, to really kind of do your homework before you end up at any networking event. Or, as I like to do, even figure out who is going to be there and get a clue of who I might connect well with and otherwise, so that I'm not walking into the room cold, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a great, awesome idea as well. So what would be some of your top tips for anyone dreading networking, like I had in the beginning myself, and I'm sure a lot of other business owners?
So if you're dreading networking, you're thinking about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You're not thinking about what you can give to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first thing to do is, if you're dreading it, You're focusing on what you're going to get. You're not thinking, how can I be useful to other people? Push, as in some cases, I just like push the tension away, push the angst away to somebody else. Have it be something that really falls more on their shoulders, not yours. So that's one. Mm-hmm. Two, why are you there? If it's, is this the best place for you to be? If you're feeling dread, then is there a reason you're there? Is there a better place for you to put your time and energy? I have something called the weather report, which is whether or not you go. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of a fun little test, if you will, of asking people, why are you coming to this event? What's the reason that's you're hoping to accomplish? Mm-hmm. What is it that's going to be useful for you? And just be sure that this is the best place for you to be. Should you be home with your kids, reading bedtime stories? Is it date night to have with your spouse? Sometimes I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be out and about running around, and this may not necessarily be the best place for our time.
That's a really, really good point. I know early on in my business, I tried to hit every single networking event I possibly could. It could be a technology network, and there's a whole bunch of computer geeks in the room, and I'm just totally out of place and don't know what to say to any of them. And I'm like, why did I come here? Because I'm told I have to network. And I like the other thing you mentioned, which I've also heard from our good friend, Diane Darling, which is about speaking, which is when you get nervous on stage, it's all about you. You're thinking about yourself. You're not thinking about the audience. What can you give to the audience? In this case,
exactly.
What can you give to the people at the networking event? Not what can I take from everyone around me?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Because often I've heard the difference between really successful people and people who are still struggling to get up on top is that successful people are not going about life thinking, what can I take from others, but how can I give? How can I serve?
No, absolutely. And I remember I was at a conference a number of years ago, and the CEO of SAS, Jim Goodnight, spoke, and he's obviously very well-to-do and successful. And someone said to him, what do you do to give back? And he pushed back a little bit in a very way, and he says, what have I stolen? And he, and won, and he says, I've earned it, which was a good point. Yeah. But he also said, we complain about what we spend on technology or a computer. Just think about what it gets you. Mm-hmm. Think about, you spend $1,000 or whatever it might be. Gosh, you earn a living off of that. Not that it needs to be more expensive, but in many cases, I think, what do you get out of things? Because it's what you invest in it. What's the time you take? It's one of the reasons why I think education and lifelong learning is so incredibly important. And I love it when I'm with people who really embrace lifelong learning, because they're going to understand they really need to take this to a different level to make themselves successful and also to help others.
Yeah, it's true. And that's one of the things I love about Savvy. And I initially started as a marketing tool, and then it's become this thing where I get to meet new people all the time. Yeah. They share their wisdom, which not only gets passed on to me, but the listeners. It's just a wonderful gift. What I like that you mentioned earlier is the fact that, when you're new and you're scared and you're getting out there, I have to get my product out there. I have to get my product. I have to get people to buy it. And that's your focus. You end up going into a room where you're all just passing out business cards and you're not focused on helping each other. And you all walk out frustrated with 100 business cards. Instead, if you all walked in there and thought, hey, let me see how I can help people with my God-given talents, and you would all walk out there probably with contacts, valuable contacts, where you could all help each other grow as a community instead of it's what's in it for me type of attitude.
One of my first jobs was a teacher at a parochial school, and they were sharing some of the essays that the kids had written. And it started K through 12. And I don't know how old this little guy was, but he wrote in his essay, which I still remember vividly, that he thought one of the teachers, he thought he had a lot of hidden talents. And if the teacher found it, she'd have a nice day.
Aw, that was so cute.
It's not precious. And I think we all need to remember we have talents. And spiritually, that actually means gold is what talents are biblically. And so I think in many cases, it's really important for us to think about we each have gifts. I saw a friend of mine the other day, and she's an amazing singer, amazing performing artist. Well, you don't want me singing. You don't want me performing. And she just completely loves what I do, and we have this fun love fest whenever we see each other. And I think that's part of what is important for us to do, is to really understand each other's skills and appreciate that not all of us have all of it, but we need to appreciate what people do have.
That is very true. And I think we often take our own gifts for granted and think, because a lot of people I talk to, and even myself, when I first got my business started, it was more about what business can I build that will make money than what business can I build that will just reflect my greatest gifts and passion that can serve the world. So my first business being financial consulting, not my passion, not my greatest gift. I'm good at it, but this is what I truly love. And people can see the difference, and I'm able to serve people in a better way. So going out there and thinking, how can I take my greater gifts into the world and recognize them, not say, hey, anyone can draw a picture or take a picture or photograph or be a coach or whatever it might be. No, they can't, not in your unique way.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I don't want us to leave here, Diane, without people finding out more about getting in contact with you, working with you. How can they do that?
They can contact me at Diane Darling, Diane, it's one N, and Darling. I tell people that whenever I introduce myself, I say it slowly, because if I say, hi, I'm Diane Darling, a lot of times I get, Darlene, nice to meet you. It's so important to say your name slowly. I'm dyslexic, and so I also, in many cases, introduce myself backwards. And what I mean by that is if I'm at an event and I'm the speaker, I'll say, hi, I'm your speaker. My name is Diane Darling, because, again, it slows me down. And I learned this by watching my mother not have any name because she was Diane's mom.
Oh, well, that's a good...
But it's important for us to find the connection. Hi, I'm Christina's neighbor. Hi, I'm Christina's guest. My name is. And it lets the other person know they're going to hear a name. It means you care about your name. And with mine in particular, because it's both D's, you want to slow down. I was interviewed by somebody the other day for a radio show. And at the end, she said, keep advancing. And I said, what was that again? And she said, keep advancing. And I said, it's 2 words. Slow it down. So DianeDarling.com, and you can go on there. I'll have a new website hopefully in the next week or so. You can get some information on there that will be useful, and you can contact me. And happy to be a resource. I work a lot with corporations who bring me in to work with their great talent. I work with nonprofits, helping them recruit volunteers, find board members, and raise money. Mm-hmm. I do some work with a lot of professional service firms, law firms, accounting firms, people who are very technically skilled but may not necessarily feel comfortable about the networking piece of things, but it's incredibly important. Mm-hmm. Doing a little bit more with healthcare these days, and I do a lot with women because I am one. I work with men too, but I find in many cases, because I am female, I get tapped in to work with some of the women's community, which is just amazing. A few months ago, I worked with women cardiologists. They're less than 5% of the population of cardiologists. It's only 5% of them are women. And I shared the story about coming in on the cab in, and that guy says, yeah, there's a lot of women in this conference, the limo driver. And I said, oh, yeah. And he says, what do they do? And I said, cardiologists. And he says, I've never met a woman cardiologist before. Is that because it's too hard? It was just like funny. Wow. And I told the story to the women, this is all the more reason you need to be out there, because then that's not even going to be a question. Yeah. So really amazing, amazing people, but helping them speak about their research, speak about their practice, talk about the work that they're doing. Be sure that, when there's a paper or a presentation slotted at a conference, they get access to speak and share their information. So, that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that women, or everyone out there, should get out there and talk about what they do and share their gifts and talents, because just that very story you mentioned about the guy saying, oh, I've never met a woman cardiologist. It must be super hard. Many years ago, when I was just taking flight training for the first time, I had come with my flight gear to the bus stop nearby, and it was the only thing near to the airport. There was only one thing that if you're at that bus stop, you're only going to one place, and that's the airport. So what did the guy say at the bus stop? Oh, are you studying to be a flight attendant? Because he assumed if I'm going to a flight school, it must be because I'm going to become a flight attendant or something, not an actual pilot. And I said, well, actually, they don't teach stewardesses over at the flight school. I'm studying flying. But it's funny that in this day and age, when it becomes being a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, that still... there's that, not prejudice so much, but idea that women can't do what men do. So it still boggles my mind too.
Well, it's a surprise. And so the more of it is to get out there and let people see this recent story in South Carolina has been sad with these young folks well, not all of them, but young, but at this Bible thing who got killed. I find it fascinating when you're watching Black churches.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were kids, we went to a Black church in Montgomery, Alabama. We lived there as kids and for a little bit. I was just in shell shock culturally because the Black church is so animated, and they're singing and they're praising and they're chatting, and that my church environment had been much more reserved. And the cultural shock of that was really quite profound and moving as you saw this. And, when you saw this service the other day and President Obama starts singing a cappella Amazing Grace, and you see this just culture that wouldn't happen in a white church.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in some cases this doesn't need to be really remote and really far. It can be something that's pretty close to home about just embracing differences and understanding this is how that works for them. Doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean it's wrong. It works differently for them, and embrace it.
Yeah, and everyone can have different ways to express themselves. All good, just different. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I want to thank you again, Diane, for coming and joining us on Savvy Central Radio and sharing your gifts and talents regarding wisdom.
You're so welcome. My pleasure indeed.
Join our mailing list today by texting Savvy Radio to find out about upcoming guests and events and receive a free gift, how podcasting can help increase sales and influence in your business.
Savvy Central Radio is home to over 100,000 listeners per month globally and runs in syndication on 8 AM and FM platforms, including iHeartRadio and 6 podcasting platforms. To find out more about our paid sponsorship opportunities or to become a guest and find out how we can help you get your message out to the world, call 718 area code 713-2289 or email at savvycentralradio@gmail.com.